Hello to you and wherever you are in the world. Today I am in my jumpsuit. This is like Korean style fashion, I think. I found this on Instagram. I love this jumpsuit. Let me see. Oh. Yeah, I love it and I think my ass looks fantastic in it. A few times when I've been out in it, people have been like, "Excuse me, miss." Like, "Excuse me, miss. Your face mask has to cover your nose." I'll be like, "Excuse me, did you just misgender me?" And I guess because I'm a man, they don't apologise. But it doesn't actually annoy me. If anything, I'm like, oh, they noticed me. I exist. Anyway, jumpsuits aside, I wanted to come in and talk about Helen Mort, who is an author I recently discovered. I met her at it was a spoken word event, but she was actually promoting this, I think, if I believe rightly. Yes. But the first thing I read of hers was her poetry collection, No Map Could Show Them. This was a Poetry Book Society recommendation in 2016, I think. So she's a poet first and foremost, but she recently wrote a novel, which is called Black Car Burning. So her poetry, this collection centres around rock climbing and hiking, and it's about women doing it as well. So it's like writing in this kind of like romantic idea of nature from a perspective focusing on women, which isn't really done that much, I don't think. I'll read you something from the back that will probably explain it much better than I can. Here are odes to the women who dared to break new ground. From Miss Jemima Morrell, a young Victorian woman from Yorkshire who hiked the Swiss peaks in her skirt and petticoats, to the modern British mountaineer, Alison Hargreaves, who died descending the summit of K2. So a lot of the poems are quite short. They're about mountains and hills, and a lot of them are set in Sheffield. I've never been to Sheffield. It's not anything you really hear about that much in contemporary literature. But I'll read you a bit of her first poem, Mountain. Mountain, you are very successful, but you have rocks in your chest. Your stomach is a boulder to hold you up. Your legs grow stony too. You buy coffee, run board meetings where no one says you're made of scree, but above your head their talk is weather. Your eyes collect new rain, and you know what you are, because like any hillside, you don't sleep. Your feet could hold you here forever, but your sides are crumbling, and when you speak, your words are rockfall. You're scared your heart is tumbling from your mouth. They're not all quite so emotionally bare, but that one I think as an opening is a really good entry into her poetry, and I like the way she uses metaphor. So similar to the way her poetry focuses on landscapes and women's lives, I recently picked up Black Car Burning, which was published in 2019. So I read this recently and I wanted to come and talk about it. So as you can tell, the cover is really, really beautiful. It's not too overdone because they try and make covers really beautiful just to make them look beautiful, but this has climbing rope on it, and as you probably might have guessed, the novel is centered around people doing rock climbing and hiking and stuff like that. So I think the cover is really, really befitting and a good choice. This book centers around, it follows like 3 different narratives, but they are all pretty contemporary narratives. So you follow Karen and Alexa, who are in a relationship together. They're women. One of them is a police community support officer. She also has a weird relationship with her father. I think because she's a lesbian, there's some awkwardness about that with her father, or they like used to be. So now they're kind of okay or not, but they're never sure if they are quite okay. So that relationship was interesting. And there's also another narrative, which is Lee, I think his name is. And he is someone he's become obsessed with the Hillsborough disaster. He's constantly writing up notes about it, and the further you go into it, the more he explores that. So parts of the novel are just like exploring the climbing, and they're about Alexa and Karen's relationship and kind of just being 21st century women in Sheffield. Then it contrasts it with Lee, and he's trying to write this trauma dialogue about the Hillsborough disaster because he's not sure how he feels about it. So the book's about trauma, and obviously rock climbing is also a dangerous sport, I guess it is. The book contrasts the Hillsborough disaster with rock climbing, so obviously they're very, very different, but thematically it works. The novel is also punctuated with short kind of vignettes, which are written from the perspective of the hills and the mountains that the people go climbing over. And the first few times you read those, they're not overly written. Like, obviously it's like a mountain's perspective, so it's fiction, but it's kind of like free and direct discourse where the mountain's voice encapsulates like the people in that area. So I find that really refreshing. But after a while, it happens quite a lot. They're titled after what the names of the hills are known as. So Black Car Burning is meant to be one of the more dangerous hills, I think. But then other ones are called like Alport Castles. However, so I enjoyed those for a while because they help break up the narrative, because the narrative is always changing between Alexa, Karen, and then Lee. So the novel was never boring, which is good. But I do feel like there is a kind of trend in contemporary fiction where if a novelist is writing a first person narrative, they always like split it between different people, because first person is quite a limiting perspective. They tend to just add other people in to kind of flesh the novel out more, which sometimes really, really works, but other times I'm like, just one perspective would be enough, honestly. Or like maybe one or two would be enough, but like when there's like three and then you're mixing that with the extra kind of short narratives of the mountains, after a while I was a bit like, some of the voices weren't distinct enough. So like Lee's voice was distinct, Alexa I liked, and the mountains there themselves had their own voices, which I liked. However, because there's quite a few mountains, after like the first three, it kind of becomes a bit predictable. For a debut, I thought it was subtly accomplished. However, one thing I wasn't sure about is that Alexa and Karen, so they're in a polyamorous relationship. So that's the other part of the novel that I really enjoyed, the portrait of the polyamorous relationships in it. So Alexa and Karen, they also live with two other guys, I think. So everyone in the house is seeing each other in a polyamorous relationship where they all know about each other. So that was really fascinating to read about. I really enjoyed that, but the perspective also shifts between Alexa and Karen. And although the chapters are given the title of the name of the person you're following, so that's kind of easy to follow, but even when I was reading between Alexa and Karen, I didn't feel like their voices were quite distinct enough. I was like, sometimes I'd be reading Alexa or Karen and I'd be like, who's who? But maybe because they're in a polyamorous relationship, it's meant to be a little bit like that. But personally, I would have liked it to be a bit more distinct. The other thing I liked is that the pacing wasn't too slow. You can see it's not a huge book and it's not too slim where you don't get enough meat of the characters, so you do get just enough. And the exploration of the Hillsborough disaster I thought was really well done. And I thought with Alexa being a police community support officer, the way she has to go around Sheffield looking at different parts of the communities, I thought that was a really interesting way of the novel tackling issues around multiculturalism, which, I mean, multiculturalism kind of feels quite dated to say now. It's kind of like a very 90s phrasing, but I think sometimes in like northern places, there's like these odd pockets where everyone, it might be like Somalian, or everyone might be Pakistani, or it might be like a particular Muslim area, or even like Jewish areas in Manchester. There's like areas dotted about, but that's in Manchester. But then in other places, like you have other smaller towns where you also have these kind of veins of that. So I think sometimes in towns like that, things haven't changed for like 30 years and those parts of the community are still fractured. So I think it was really interesting how the novel tackled that. And I like that it tackled it through a white woman's perspective of it as well, because she's the community support officer. As a white woman, she's observing it all. But obviously, because Helen Mort is white, I felt that was a very sincere way of doing that without being problematic. I can't wait to find out what she reads next. If you're into women's writing and maybe writing about not necessarily quiet places, but places that are less hype, if you're sick of reading about London, maybe pick this up. And I'd also, if you're into poetry, I'd recommend this as well. And I think if you're new to poetry, this would probably be quite a good place to start too. It's not like too long and the poems are quite short, easy to follow. Have you read any Helen Mort? Have you heard of her? If you have, let me know. And what are you reading at the moment? Let me know in the comments. At the moment, I'm taking part in the reading rush. So I'm reading The Children Act and Bit of Fame still. And I'm hoping to finish this tomorrow. But I'm really enjoying both of them, and reading them alongside each other is really helping, because this can be quite hard going at times, but it's like really, really well written. Like, I'm really, really impressed so far, and I know this one really well. So even though you might think a book on Sylvia Plath might sound quite hard going, as a person, she's so interesting that it's actually, to me, it's a lot of fun to read. It's a thrill to read this book. So I'm really enjoying reading them side by side. So yeah, that is my current check-in, and I'm glad to give this book a shout out. All right, bye.